The world won't get no better if we just let it be. The world won't get no better. We got to change it, yeah, just you and me. So that was Wake Up Everybody by Harold Melvin, and it captures the essence of the theme in the Business as Usual series hosted by the Architecture Foundation's Young Trustees. Sorry for absolutely butchering that. It's quite hard to read the lyrics in a professional manner without trying to sing them out, so apologies for that. Just to let you know, the session is being recorded. However, we will edit it before posting, so feel free to be frank in your questions and discussions. My name is Amandeep, and I'm joined by my fellow trustees, David and Betty. And this is the third installment in the series focusing on architecture, activism, and how young practitioners can push for genuine change. Today, our three inspirational speakers will be talking about the different ways in which they have broken the mold to push for change, the challenges they faced along the way, and the progress they've made. There is no question that there is inequality and a lack of colour within the architectural profession and the built environment. If we take London as an example, a city which has a relatively diverse population of over 40% of people coming from BAME backgrounds. However, only 16% of all architecture and engineering jobs in London are held by people of colour. This compares to 31% across all other sectors. The reason for these disparities are fairly well documented, and some can be attributed to the support, or actually lack of support, that BAME architects encounter through their studies. While studying architecture at undergrad and postgrad, I distinctly remember seeing the diminishing population of Black and Brown students throughout the course, so it was no surprise to me when I encountered the supporting Diversity Handbook published by the Mayor's Office, which states that students of colour make up 39% of the cohort at Part 1, and by the end of Part 3, this figure shrinks to about 12%. What this leads to is fewer BAME architects graduating and becoming part of the workforce in the first place. The lack of BAME architects and therefore visible role models affects everything from initial awareness of architecture as a profession to career progression, setting up and beyond. I realized the importance of this in my final year of Part 2. At the end of every year, most architecture schools launch their degree shows with the hotly anticipated award ceremony, often crowded with families, friends, and of course the exhausted but relieved students, where most or almost every student is eagerly thinking the same thing. It's definitely not going to be me, but maybe it is. In my final year of postgrad, I was whispering to friends about the candidates who'd be nominated for the coveted RIBA President Medal nominations and clapping for the usual suspects as their names were announced. When, to my shock, I heard my name being called out. I didn't move. I thought it was actually a mistake. When pushed by my friends, I collected the nomination with a roar of applause, shaking and trembling as I returned to my friends. All my friends cheered me on, but I specifically remember my Black and Brown friends saying to me, "This one's for us." And it may seem like something small, especially for a nomination that I never ended up winning anyway, but I was the only Black or Brown person to be nominated for this award in the 5 years I studied there. Yes, I double checked. I felt the gravitas of that moment after and knew the race is something, felt the gravitas of that moment after and knew this nomination was bigger than me. The feeling of empowerment by the success of other people within your race is something I think is especially felt by people of color, and more so in minorities. When someone sets up their own practice, when they win an award, when someone is promoted, when they make it to a judging panel, or when they become visible advocates for equality, we start to feel these successes as if they were our own. And these are just scratching the surface of some of the achievements made by our speakers this evening. The point of this session today is not to bring a fantastic group of speakers just to talk about diversity because they are people of color. Rather, we want to use this opportunity to firstly promote them as inspirational individuals and experts in their fields who continue to champion diversity in the architecture profession embedded in what they do every day. And secondly, we want to discuss what the effect of what effect does harnessing the unlimited potential of a more diverse architectural profession have on our cities and communities. So without further ado, I'll pass over to my colleague David, who will introduce the speakers this evening, followed by some questions from us, then the audience. Please keep posting questions in the chat box throughout the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Deep, for that great introduction. I think it's really set the tone for this evening's chat. Firstly, I'd like to thank each of our speakers for being here with us today. We're really looking forward to hearing about all your work and all of your experiences. So our first speaker this evening is Gurmeet Sian, who is an architect and founder of the East London-based practice Office Sian. The practice is involved in a number of domestic, corporate and arts projects for both private and developer clients, and has recently completed the award-winning Phoenix Garden community building in Soho, which has been shortlisted for an RIBA Regional Award. The practice is also engaged with a number of charitable organisations in and around London. Office Sian has been selected for inclusion in the upcoming Architecture Foundation publication, New Architects 4, and is gaining recognition within the wider architectural community for the quality of their work. But Gurmeet has spoken about the challenges and prejudice he has faced in the industry due to his ethnicity and the difficulties faced by BAME-led practices. Gurmeet has taken a mentoring role, offering work placements in his practice to GCSE students from BAME backgrounds to encourage and support diverse entry into the profession. I'll now pass you over to Gurmeet.
Hi David, Amandeep, everybody. I hope you all hear me. Thanks to the Architecture Foundation for organising such an amazing series of events, and yeah, thank you for having me for this one. So I'm going to give a 2 or 3 minute, maybe 4 minute just intro. I'm going to read what I've written, if that's okay. So as an introduction to myself, I thought that I would not just read out what's already on my website, which seems like that's something that you could all do if you wanted in your own time or not. Instead, I thought that I would run through a series of lesser known episodes and experiences, all of which have punctuated my journey to this point now. And hopefully that's more helpful. Indeed, this is my attempt to offer to you all a fuller, more honest picture of my journey, in inverted commas. In essence, what follows is what the About page on the Office Sian website could actually look like. If I was completely honest with you all, I hope it provides some illumination. So the alternative About page may mention the following. It may mention that I barely scraped into architecture school at Liverpool Uni, as I earned very poor grades on my A-levels, and only an unconditional offer saved me. It may mention that it took me many years to find my feet as an 18-year-old, moving up to Liverpool from a very small town and experiencing new sights and sounds. It would probably state that failing my first year at architecture school was not the best start to my formal education. But I think someone recently told me that James Sterling, who also went to Liverpool at uni, also failed his first year. I don't know whether that's true or not, but power to us. It may also mention that my idea of gaining year-out experience in India so that I can work in an architect's practice and also connect with my heritage and roots resulted in a surprising conclusion. I'd never felt more British in my life. It would mention the joy of moving to London after graduation and the sense of feeling alive, being around energetic people from a diverse background. It would proclaim that I'd never felt so confident. It would state that after I was called a racist slur by a senior colleague in practice, I said nothing, I walked out, cried, and then walked back in again to silently continue work. It would celebrate how I've had some wonderful memories of being mentored and helped throughout my career by some amazing and caring professionals. It would highlight that my first private commission was only possible because the clients incredibly put their faith and confidence in a very young and proven architect, something never to be underestimated. It would emphasize that my progression is never achieved in isolation and that I have benefited from the patient and nurturing advice from others. It would confess that although I have the much coveted built public commission under my belt, I have little concrete idea as to how to get the next one. It would state that receiving accolades, nomination prizes and opportunities will always make me question quietly whether they have been offered because of my merits or to ensure diversity. I sense that this is a feeling I will have throughout my career. It would also clearly state that it is okay for me to acknowledge to myself sometimes that the fruits of labour and opportunities received are offered by those who believe that perhaps, occasionally, I can be good at what I do. And finally, it would proclaim that the About page on any website is best read with a pinch of salt.
Okay, thank you, Gurmeet, for that great introduction. Our second speaker this evening is Alisha Morenike Fisher. Alicia is a co-founder of Black Females in Architecture, an organisation with a mission to increase the visibility of Black and Black mixed heritage females in architecture and the built environment, and to actively address the issues of inequality and diversity within the profession. Alicia is also a co-founder of the design and research practice Migrant Bureau, which creates research that facilitates design interventions in response to people's experience of the built environment, addressing the influence of culture, geography, and social circumstance. Currently, Alicia works within project management at Arcadis and has previously worked with public practice and New London Architecture, where she had a role as a teaching facilitator for young people. I am now going to pass you over to Alicia for her introduction.
Hello. So I thought I would engage you all on my architectural journey and how I co-created some of these platforms. So just to begin with, in my own architectural journey, I struggled quite a lot. I was the first of my family to enter into this industry, so everything was very much brand sparkling new. From the beginning, I struggled quite a lot with my heritage, which later on I realized really impacted almost every facet of my life, but also just in terms of the projects I created and the crits and stuff like that. And I think I felt quite a big disconnect, especially in terms of a few modules, for instance, like architecture history, when we started off talking about the Greeks and the Romans and kind of not recognizing the contributions that a lot of the countries south of the equator had on the industry, let alone the entire world. I think in that scope as well, I built a lot of frustration, specifically on my final year. I do apologize, there's thunder in my area. Yeah, so if you hear stuff, it's going on in the background. So yeah, I struggled quite a lot and I got really frustrated, especially when I got to my dissertation in my final year. And I thought to myself, how can I exist in this industry when I don't really see many people like me? And I think the only person that I could see visibly was Elsie Owusu. And I just thought to myself, okay, so what can I do to engage in more of the discussions in the books I'm reading that really focus on my own heritage as being both British and Nigerian? And I've always kind of struggled with that, because I think in understanding kind of all the complexities, I think I also understood the role that the British had to play in erasing a lot of my Nigerian heritage, or a lot of my Nigerian literature, architecture in general. So I was definitely in a very confusing space, and I convinced my tutors somehow, I don't know how I did that, but I convinced my tutors that I would take a term off in my final year, and I would do a project which was self-funded. So I put out a crowdfund and I asked people just to help me. And I reached my goal, and I ended up doing a 6 weeks in 6 African cities project. I didn't actually do 6 weeks, I ended up doing 4 months. But I was in Nigeria, in Lagos, Cape Town and Johannesburg. And I was asking really important questions. I was asking who are going to be the facilitators of urban change in Lagos, especially in terms of environmental justice. I was asking questions about racial identity, about womanhood and Black womanhood, and also language, the power that language really has to play when you're looking at decolonizing the curriculum. And I ended up, strangely, finding that in Cape Town, they were having a lot of the discussions that we are currently having at the moment. So in terms of white privilege, in terms of really questioning whiteness in the architecture paradigm. And I was there during the riots when they were having the Fees Must Fall. I think in the UK, the media was very much all guns blazing and fire all over the place. But something that was really interesting was actually the fact that when I was there, yes, there were riots, 100%, but there were also really important discussions being held by faculty members and students. These conversations were really interesting because I think I then recognized that the way that I could articulate myself in architecture would have to come from that same passion that all these South Africans had, to protest, to fight, and to also really think about how they influence their own projects, how their culture is entwined with that. And so I came out to the UK, again, still frustrated. I remember going to the library and obviously seeing all these architecture books, and they were mostly just Western architecture. There was barely anything about Asian architecture. I'll be lucky if I see Latin American architecture or cities or anything to do with that. And then also, obviously, African architecture was non-existent. So I had to really push myself to get this done. At the same time, again, just to be very transparent about my architecture journey, is that I was caring for my mom. So I was in and out. So it took me double the amount of time to actually finish my degree. And in that space, I don't know if things have changed now, but there wasn't obviously the opportunity for flexibility. And also during my architecture degree, sorry, not career, I think I really recognized the fact that I had a lone voice. I didn't have a community. And that was again because I was the only Black woman in my course. So I definitely think things have progressed currently, but I think that frustration really made me think about, okay, so if I then finish my degree, how can I help other people? How can I support? How can I use this frustration that is very much my own feeling, and how can I put that into something amazing? So I started out with the students, the Young Architect Student Network, I think it's called. And this was in 2017. And this was because I couldn't gain access to a lot of the architects I wanted to get in contact with. And so I just said to myself, okay, so if I'm gonna stay in this industry, I need to see myself as a mentor. I need to see my peers as a mentor. There's so many things I can learn from them and vice versa. And then that took off, and that was an incredible experience. And then I met Hani at a Yasmin Lari event, which was looking at the barefoot approach. And that was really interesting because I think we didn't recognize at the beginning when we first met, obviously, the path that we would go on together in terms of setting up 3.09 Design Collective and then Migrant Bureau. But I think we always recognized that we wanted to change things. We wanted to represent something bigger than ourselves and to make sure that other people were supported. And then on top of that, in 2018, again, at another event, I met with Neba, I met with Lassie, and I met with Akuya, and we decided that we would start something because we, again, couldn't see ourselves in these industries, in these spaces. And yeah, it was a really interesting, it has been a really interesting space to be in, to kind of see all these things happen and to see other networks take hold of their own paths and their own careers. And I think that is definitely something I'm looking forward to.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. And some well-placed thunder in the background, which was all timed, right? So just to remind everybody, you can post your questions, comments in the chat box, because after our next speaker, we'll be putting questions to the panel, and we'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts. So our final speaker this evening is Ken Okonkwo. Ken is a practicing architect at Haworth Tompkins, where he's been an associate director since 2018. Ken has taken a leading role in many of the practice's education, cultural and residential projects, and his role at Haworth Tompkins also includes managing the practice's human resources, well-being and social value strategy groups. So this includes recruitment, mentoring and championing equal opportunities. In addition to this, Ken sits on the Stephen Lawrence Architecture Advisory Board. So I will now pass you over to Ken.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, I think that I haven't really prepared anything in massive detail, but I think I'll probably just give you a kind of overview of my journey and kind of where I kind of see myself now in relation to sort of my position and being a role model, etc. So I, like Alicia, I have Nigerian parents, or I'm Nigerian, and I'd say that I was lucky. There's been a lot of luck in that, in that I managed to go to a private school, and I'm just going to say this because I think it's always worth bearing in mind in relation to our profession generally. So I went to a private school on an assisted place, which means tested. So, you know, it's a huge contribution to the cost. And my parents couldn't afford to, there's 4 of us, so we couldn't afford to all go to those schools. And I went to school in South London, so I think that's also sort of quite a good location to go to school in that, you know, it was nice enough, but you always sort of had a sort of connection to London and diversity, which I think is really important in private education. And I'll just say I don't support a 2-tiered education system, but you know, just making the point. And then we all know what private school gives you. It gives you a sense of entitlement, whether that's misplaced or not. But it does help in that respect. And I say that because I'm generally quite shy. And I sort of would say I probably have like imposter syndrome sometimes. So I think that going to a school, a private school, helps in this profession where you sort of have to be quite tough. And even if it's not something that comes naturally to you, that, you know, that's something that underpins and sort of helps drive you forward and deal with the, you know, your effective difference in a predominantly white industry. So my parents were quite laissez-faire. They were like, we've got you in to school, off you go. By the way, I've made it to the top of my profession, so, you know, I'm expecting you to get on with it. And I think what's sort of interesting about that is that, you know, like Alicia, there's no one in architecture in my family at all. So I think it just took, you know, it basically took a while to sort of find the right role models and connections and whatnot. So I've always been, in terms of sort of my career, my blackness, I've just sort of tried to get on with it and do what comes naturally, really. And I sort of totally appreciate that it's easier for some people than others. But I've sort of tried not to think too much about things, and I've tried not to just sort of be like, okay, I'm going to do what I enjoy and I'm going to see where it takes me. You know, I've probably got lucky in that sort of after going to a couple of universities, which it was okay. I sort of think that you know, the crit culture and the culture of the education system is obviously Eurocentric. So, you know, it's not straightforward. It's not something that comes naturally, I think, to people of colour. And I think that the curriculum kind of needs to change to be more inclusive. And I think the whole cultural thing as well, my closest friend at university, his dad was an architect, his brother was an architect, his uncle was an architect, his grandfather was an engineer, you know, so, you know, you just do what you can, I think. So I sort of completed my education, and I think sort of joined Haworth Tompkins after a couple of, you know, I'd worked at a couple of practices. I sort of did a while in Amsterdam, which kind of really helped my excitement for architecture. I just thought it was sort of, the whole experience was great. And I joined a small practice in Brixton. Not that it matters, but the sort of director was gay, very open, you know, lovely place. Loved it. It was just what I needed. It was near home. It was in Brixton. It was fantastic. But it was kind of a bit small. And then I joined Haworth Tompkins, and I basically still don't know to this day why they employed me at that time, because it was always a really good practice, but I'd say it's probably quite competitive. But they gave me a chance, and what's been fantastic about the time there is that when I joined, there was about 25 people. We're now up to sort of 85. And the evolution and the kind of attitude of the directors have been fantastic. So they're sort of, the doors have sort of begun to open, a bit, and just the whole way that we're set up. We now have an employee ownership trust, and we have these working groups, which means that employees are more empowered to control the direction of the company. So, I'd say it's good, but I think what's really important is, I don't think that I'm an exceptional designer. I think there are some really, great designers out there. But I think what's really important, what we need to do now, is sort of ensure that that we create a platform for people that are very good and really hardworking, and making sure that the doors are open for them. So you don't have to be the superstar to be given a chance. You don't have to be, absolutely exceptional, 3 times as good as your white peer in order to be given a chance. So what we need to do is sort of make sure that, it becomes the norm to have diversity. So that's what we're trying to do. And then in terms of what's happening at Haworth Tompkins, I think everyone is behind the direction. Everyone supports the idea of diversity, and wants it to happen. But at the same time, there's the white privilege thing. It's there. I think only in that, if it doesn't bother you, you don't think too hard about it. And I think everyone really, really means well at the practice, but it's difficult, and it's also difficult. I know through my work with Stephen Lawrence, and we've heard about the drop-off rates from the beginning in architecture as you sort of get more qualified, and it's difficult to implement in practice purely because the people that come through the door are less diverse, sort of as you get more senior. So what we're doing with Stephen Lawrence Trust is sort of trying to ensure that the kids stay in education, as in stay in the profession, encourage them to stay in the profession, support them to stay in the profession, create, networks, mentoring, all that sort of thing, to just sort of be there and be present and be available for support. So I think, in a nutshell, that's what we're sort of trying to do, hopefully we'll succeed quickly. But it's a real early stage issue. We often talk about equality in practice and talk about female directors and that sort of thing, and that's I find that's fairly easy to fix, because if you've got practice and half of them are women, it's easy to promote and to have equality at director level. But if you've only got 1 or 2 people of colour in your practice, it's a lot trickier. So what we need to do is just ensure that and support people to stay in the profession, to encourage them that it is a good profession, and to give us all the best chance of getting people in successful positions.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you to Gurmeet and Alicia as well for all your really powerful introductions, and about the kind of other bit on your about page, which kind of takes my first question out, but I think I'll rephrase it anyway. So I think instead what I'd say is, when hearing something unjust, especially about yourself, do you feel more powerful to stand up for yourself now? Especially, I know, Gurmeet, you mentioned a time when a racial slur was made and you left the room, cried and returned. And I've picked my moments where I've said something where I've remained silent. Start with you, Gurmeet. Would you say you would always speak out? And if you won't, when would you not, and when would you? And how would that influence the people around you when they decide whether they should speak out on your behalf or not?
Well, I think that my general rule has been swallow it, actually. But one of the amazing things, which is such a depressing thing to actually proclaim, but one of the amazing things that's happened in the last few weeks with the Black Lives Matter protests is that's given me more energy to actually stand up for myself. Sorry, I think that I'm cutting out. There's a storm going overhead. So
yeah, no, I saw that. I think we got the gist of that. What about you, Alicia?
Yeah, I think I have definitely developed gaining my voice. I don't think I had it in me when I was in architecture school because I was so frustrated. I think having a network and having that support system is really important. And I think, yeah, definitely resonate with Gurmeet because during the Black Lives Matter, I think I just got to a point where I just had enough. And I just got so tired and I was just like, okay, rest, get your energy back, and actually let's talk about the systems of oppression. Let's talk about, again, decolonizing the system. Let's really talk about patriarchy. Let's talk about all these really important discussions when it comes to like exploitation, what that even looks like in the industry. And I think it does empower people. I have had, which is weird because I didn't think, oh, because maybe I'm speaking about it on Twitter that people would be like, oh, like now I can chime in, now I can speak up. But I do think it is really powerful because yeah, there's been a lot of other people who have personally inspired me to actually speak up, and it's definitely a domino effect. So I feel like there is definitely something happening at the moment, and I'm really excited for it. But I am also aware that I personally have had to get to this stage, and it's taken a lot of progression. And not everyone necessarily is that confident to speak out. It does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of energy, and you do need to protect your energy.
Thanks, Alicia. Any thoughts from you on that, Ken?
Yeah, I think my view on it is I don't really have a problem standing up when it's really explicit and clear. You know, when if there are issues of kind of racism or discrimination, if it's blatant, it's quite easy to call out, and I'm happy to do it. I think the problem comes when it's like when it's a little bit trickier to kind of put your finger on what the issue is. And I think that's there's, you know, this movement that's happening at the moment, there's two sides of it, isn't there? There's the sort of, you know, let's lynch someone in broad daylight kind of thing. And then there's the sort of, you know, institutional, you know, not being given opportunities, like you know, slightly strange behaviour. And I think, you know, it can come in many guises and, you know, veiled in different ways in our industry. And I think that's the tricky part. And I think what we need to do is sort of work out how to best articulate that and to kind of, you know, to recognise it and to sort of, you know, be able to call it out with confidence. I think that will help. But I think the kind of, you know, the obvious stuff is just, I don't have a problem standing up in that situation at all, because it's just obvious.
Oh, that's my thoughts too. What would you say to people that are not perhaps as tenacious as you guys when faced with failure or challenges? Let's start with you, Alicia, this time.
When faced with challenges, I think everyone is tenacious. Everyone has the capability to be tenacious. And I think, again, that comes to with just development of that. What makes you, I think, when I think about it, all I can say is maybe from my experience that the things that I've learned personally is that for me, confidence has really helped me. Confidence in myself, confidence in my voice, and then confidence in the people that I support, are in my supportive system or community. So I think it is really important if you are, maybe more specifically, maybe you're new in the industry and you are maybe nervous, I think it's really important to try and find organizations or networks that can really facilitate that for you. I think I didn't have Black females in architecture when I was in my architecture school, and I recognized how beneficial it could have been. And there are so many of these other organizations and collectives and practices that are Black-led, that are of different ethnicities, different sexualities, different genders. And I think that is important because we all have all these different nuanced identities. And I think it's really important that that is supported. I think another thing I would definitely say to myself is that I recognized that I had to be active. I had to make the effort and maybe even go beyond. I think I was in desperate times. I think I was definitely in desperate times during university. I think I was very triggered. And I think I really, really recognized the fact that in order for me to survive, really, and just actually, in order for me to survive, but also thrive in this industry, I need to be able to really put myself out there. And that, again, is confidence. But just being active could be something like in this digital meeting, if there is someone with like a really great question, you could easily just send them a message and be like, hey, I really liked your question, can we connect? Let's go for a Zoom chat next week. So it starts off with those things, but I think I am learning a lot from people around me. So for instance, Hani, who is one of the co-founders of Migrant Bureau, he would always ask a question at every single event, and he made that his duty. And I think for me, that always showed me that it's not about whether or not a question is right or wrong. It's just about the fact that you put yourself out there, and no question is ever too silly to be answered. So why not just ask? So that curiosity really got to me, and I think that's really important, to be active and to be confident.
Thanks. That was actually a good one for actually carry on asking us questions too. Thanks for pushing on that as well, Alicia. What about you, Gurmeet? What are your thoughts on tenacity and kind of people that maybe don't yet have the tenacity that you guys have built over time?
I think that the personality trait of tenacity is not constant. You know, you sometimes get it, you sometimes don't. That's okay. That's with your energy levels. But I would really agree with some of the points that Alicia said. But you know, you have to build your community. You need to know the landscape of the people who you want to be with and collaborate with and understand the world around you. Do not do it in isolation. And that's something which hindered me from quite a young architect's perspective from 10 years ago, which is I thought that being tenacious was actually doing things on your own, you know, go out there, do it, you know. But actually there's another form of tenacity, which is, you know, being vulnerable and being open and asking questions and receiving answers and then working from that. But you need to work within a community. Do not be isolated. So I think that's so I think there's some really good points which have already been made, so I won't speak too much about that.
No, thanks for that one, Gurmeet. Ken, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd sort of, second all of that. I think that the people that are maybe, you know, not as tenacious, I mean, I think there's one thing, just put yourself out there, you know. The irony is, you know, a lot of people that feel, you know, entitled, they just do, that's what they do. And that's how that's how they win work. And, you know, you just have to do it. So that's one thing, is just sort of put yourself out there. But the other thing is sort of, yeah, I'd agree with what these guys have said. Is sort of the kind of community and network, and it's like, you know, it's like going to church, isn't it? It's like they sort of say you can't do it on your own, you need God and blah blah blah, and it's that sort of thing, isn't it? It's like you need a network, you need a community to help you push on, because you can't do it all on your own. So it's that sort of, yeah, it's that sort of thing. I think you kind of, it helps to have other people to empower you, to give you ideas. It's kind of about education and empowerment, isn't it? And feeling like you can speak with authority, and that normally comes, well, for me, I mean, the way I work I really enjoy working collaboratively. I'm not a very sort of, I'll just get on and do it myself kind of person. I'm always like, okay, one step, let's see what the consensus is. Is this a good idea? No, it's a stupid idea, Ken. Okay, we'll go back and do another one. So it's, you know, I sort of think once you're in a position where, you know, you've spoken to a lot of people and they're like, oh, you know, that sounds quite good, then you're able to speak with authority, because, you know, you sort of have you've got a sounding board. So I kind of think that that's quite important in sort of the, you know, in our community.
Okay. It definitely feels like tenacity is not a constant. It's something you build, and it's something that's not always on. So don't feel so disheartened if you don't feel as tenacious and confident as our speakers, because they've done a lot before they've got there. So I'll do one last question, because I'm mindful we have a lot of questions in the box and very little time to get through it. But almost, I feel like the question we put in the main heading of the talk, I haven't actually asked that. So it might seem like a slight shift in direction, but hopefully everyone's still with me. So I'm going to tie into a question that somebody else has also asked in the chat, which kind of ties in with the question as well. And they sort of said, Funmi Soleil has said, I'm sure not got that right, but they've said that, do we think that a white majority, therefore only one culture in architecture, has impacted the built environment and the kind of things you see? So I guess my question is tied to that. What do we think that a city or community designed by a more representative demographic of people who live there, what would that feel like? What would that look like? It's quite a tough question. So I'm going to start with you, Ken, just because you've finished.
Well, probably richer, more interesting, and sort of more diverse. I think that if you have anything that's homogenous is not great, and I think that, I probably should thought this one a bit harder, but I think that if you've got a kind of range of inputs from designers, automatically, you know, you're going to have a kind of richer response. I mean, I went to a talk a while back, and there was someone talking about sort of designing cycle paths throughout London, and they did, I think it was in, I can't remember which area it was in London now, but they kind of had a kind of little focus group. And the thing about cycling in like, you know, London is that until recently, you know, it was particularly challenging. You were basically sort of cycling up with the cars, and there was no kind of separation. And what that means is that the kind of people that tend to cycle are the kind of people that are up for a bit of excitement, up for a challenge.
Yes.
And you're not going to get, you know, a 50 or 60-year-old, you know, woman of colour on a bike, you know, if they have to fight against sort of, you know, the wild traffic. So that was interesting, because it sort of was like, okay, well, hang on a minute, we need to make this like more accessible for everyone. You know, if we want to encourage people to cycle, we have to make it, you know, easier and safer for everyone to do it. And the outcome is sort of the increased amount of cycle highways. But, you know, for instance, you know, I lived in the Netherlands, and they have proper curbs, and everyone cycles. I mean, going to work in the morning is like incredible. It's an incredible sight. everyone's cycling. There's like minimal cars, and it's all sorts of people. So I think that, yeah, I think a range of inputs means that you get a richer outcome. And what's really important is, at the end of the day, those are the people we're designing for. You know, so
absolutely. Yeah, I know if I told my mum I cycled to work, she would go nuts. So
I'm not allowed to still. My family's bikes are hidden when she comes over.
All the helmets and everything. What about you, Gurmeet? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a tough question. I think that perhaps not to worry too much about what it looks like, but what it feels would be my initial gut feeling. I think perhaps the short answer is, it feels to me that there would be far more places of learning and congregation, lots more schools, higher quality schools, better learning spaces, more libraries, more community centres, more community gardens, more places where society can mingle, mix and understand each other, maybe not through formal engagement, but through just rubbing against each other. And perhaps, yeah, less power to architects. You know, it's all well and good trying to curate a corner of the city to provide for society, which would then treat each other absolutely perfectly well. But still, who is the society? What is the society? Who's going to be living in there? And I think that is a huge shame over the last 10, 15 years of the breakdown of the schools building and community centres being shut down, and not to mention libraries. So for me, I think that would be a good place to start.
That sounds really good. More places to rub shoulders sounds like a great cyclical process to begin anyway. What about you, Alicia?
So yeah, I do think I think this goes back to understanding the systems of oppression, because I think having specifically looking at, for instance, who's at the top, and really recognizing who's at the bottom, and what ethnic groups, what sexualities, in terms of even like mobility, those that suffer with mobility challenges, it really does make you think about, okay, so our society is disenfranchising people all the time. So yeah, I do think specifically looking at how everything is very much supporting and for whiteness, I think that does play a really big impact on how other people can invest their time or can integrate themselves into society. So I do feel like if we are going to really like discuss whiteness, we also need to understand the systems of oppression that actually, even if we wanted to really think about our own cities, and in my respect, it would be obviously looking at Black communities, it would have to involve economic empowerment. It would have to involve really looking at dismantling capitalism, because capitalism protects whiteness basically. So we really need to think about how to dismantle these things, so actually we can come back to understand that we're all equal, we're all on the same level, because at the moment we're not. So I'm not really sure how to, I don't think I've ever thought, if it sounds really bad, but I've never really thought, except from obviously like Wakanda, I've never really thought about a city or a community that could really be for specific groups. And I think maybe that's my naivety, but that's also maybe just my understanding of the society that we're currently in, which is predominantly for, yeah, whiteness, basically.
Thank you. And that's why I asked you guys, because I had no idea to the answer of that, and I'm sure lots of other people don't either. So without further ado, I think we got loads of questions coming in. David hopefully has been like fielding away and can start us off.
Yeah, I think we might start with Neighbour, I think. Does Neighbour want to ask a question? Looks like a yes. Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Neighbour. Oh.
Hello?
Hi. Gotcha.
Thank you everyone for your contributions. I was going back to your very first question, Mandeep, about how to speak up. And I think personally, similar to Alicia and everyone else, it took me a long time to kind of find that voice and be confident enough to speak about certain things. That brings me to my question about the importance of having an ally or someone that supports you when you speak up, because otherwise the situation can turn into a debate and a fight rather than a discussion and a conversation. So my question to the panel is, how do you build those allyships with people that are from different demographics, and how do you make sure that those conversations start? Because what I'm feeling at the moment in workplaces and professional environment is a lot of discomfort about the Black Lives Matter movement or what to do. And the main thing that people come back with is, okay, I want to do something, what should I do? And that question is put back to, I guess, the Black community or ethnic minorities. So how do we build allyships that are productive, and how do we start those conversations in power dynamics such as the workspace?
Ken, do you want to start that off? I feel like your position as well in Haworth Tompkins in terms of human resources and recruitment as well, and you probably have quite a good understanding of those things as well in the kind of back of house element too. So.
Yeah, it's tricky though, because I think that I think if you're coming to it, if you're joining a bigger practice, or you haven't been there for so long, I can see how it can make people feel uncomfortable, and you feel like you might not be best placed to raise that sort of conversation. I think we've been lucky, like I said, that we have these working groups, and equality and diversity is one of them. I think it's fairly high up on the agenda, but it's not solved. But I'd say what's great about it is that it's we are willing to talk about it. But in terms of what you can do, I guess you can just sort of try and find a kind of a sympathetic ear in a way, and work with that person together, and just sort of I think sort of educate them about the issues, and sort of help put forward a plan as to why it needs to be on the agenda. I think that's kind of would be my approach. It is difficult though, because I think that you do get personalities that are just sort of like, well, I don't see what the problem is, and it's that sort of like dismissive sort of attitude that can be, I think, can be quite tricky. So I think that the only thing I think we obviously need to push it, because it's unlikely that other people will push for you, but they might do if you're lucky. But I think, yeah, I mean, you probably will need an ally, and unless you're in a high, in a high position in the company, then it's difficult if you're more junior. If you are sort of in a senior position, that's great, and now is a great excuse to kind of bring it to the front of the agenda again.
Would anybody else like to maybe comment on that?
I just want to quickly say that I do.
Any of the other panelists want to chip in there?
Yeah, I just want to say that I do think allyship is really important. It is hard because some of it can be performative. But I think an example would be, for instance, like on Twitter, the way that Christine Murray kind of, and it was, for me personally, I thought it was amazing, because I think I'm so used to almost having to call people out or to use my energy to add the extra resources. But I think, yeah, allyship is really important, and there are initiatives, there are collectives, there are organizations like Part W Collective who are working towards equity, so they look at these things, and I think that is important, and it's important to support them as well. But also, I think it's just good to have these conversations, and if people are not necessarily willing in a professional manner, I think it is really important to at least try and make sure that you use your networks, you use organizations that you're in, because that has power. There are power in numbers. So I think, for instance, like Paradigm, for instance, in the way that they've been able to structure themselves, there's no reason why someone in the group can't be like, okay, I'm having issues. Is there any way that we can come together, maybe sign a letter, maybe make a statement, maybe write an article, and make sure that every single one of us retweets it? So I think there's definitely allyship, but then there's also kind of like a way for us to connect with our networks and organizations to create that emphasis.
Great. Great. Just kind of going through some of these questions. We have one about kind of what can practices individually do from, I'm just going to see if I can find the person in this long list. No, I can't find them. Okay, I'll read that question. What can individual practices actively do to support diversity in architecture in terms of company culture, recruitment, outreach, and mentoring? I mean, I know we've kind of really covered a lot of these topics already this evening, but are there kind of like specific strategies? Ken, I know you spoke about Haworth Tompkins have shifted to this employee ownership trust model, and you know, is something like that maybe the future for practices to kind of get serious about kind of promoting, you know, diversity and equality?
Okay, so I think things that we can do, I think the that GLA diversity handbook is really great. I'm assuming everyone's sort of had a look at that, but that's got some really good tips in there. We've sort of taken on some of those aspects, so sort of trying to ensure a diverse panel as possible, interview panel. As we've been talking about it for a little while, we're sort of trying to make sure that, well, we've started monitoring the applicants. So the like having an equal ops form for every applicant. And we've always thought that if we don't know who the applicants are, we can't really sort of, you know, do anything about it, because we just don't have the data. So that's kind of like the kind of like starting point. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of an EOT, I think that does help, because the employees have a bit more power, or at least to instigate ideas. And it's been a really good process, really, because I think, or it's a really great system, because what sort of tends to happen is when there's a sort of consensus for something that, you know, makes sense, and everyone sort of gets behind it, and they're just sort of a bit like, well, why haven't we done this for ages, kind of thing. You know, and then it kind of filters its way through the system, and it's quite difficult to sort of stop it, because you kind of have to have good reason as to why, you know, why we shouldn't be implementing change for equality and that sort of thing. So I think I've always said it kind of starts from the sort of early stage of education. We need to get more people of colour through the door in the first place, and I think that supporting, you know, organisations like Stephen Lawrence and mentoring and all that sort of thing, I think it does help, because it's a long game, basically, and the odds are stacked against us. So yeah, I think that's probably my best at the moment. We're still figuring it out, though, by the way, is the short answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. Maybe a question for Gurmeet, just kind of following up on what practices can do. I mean, there's also, you spoke about the difficulty of, you know, finding work, and, you know, you've got this, you say, public commission under your belt, but, you know, you're not sure where the next one's going to come from. And, you know, is there anything that the kind of wider industry could do to kind of, you know, let's say, make opportunities more available, especially to practices that are kind of BAME led?
Well, I think that in certain aspects, it is doing something with larger tender pitches. There's diversity and inclusivity box which can be ticked, but I think that and a hell of a lot more can be done to recognise that there are some incredible, interesting younger practices not from traditional architectural backgrounds. I don't quite know what more should be done other than to seek out those practices, go to the GLA, understand that incredible, wonderful manual which was published, and, you know, just things like, I suppose, the Architecture Foundation New Architects publication out next year seems to be really championing a huge diverse background of practices which can only help. And just touching on the last question, I just wanted to say something that I completely agree with Ken, that we're still trying to work it out, and we're at the start of the process. Well, it seems like we're at the start of the process, but I do think that to get diversity into the profession, it has to be grassroots led. And I've looked at my own practice. So I'm not Haworth Tompkins. I'm a sole practitioner and a micro practice, and I think that I can do more in taking more GCSE students or more year out students, just to mentor them and to perhaps show them that there is a path through. And that's not only to suggest that they could stay within the industry, become architects or become engineers, but if we're trying to offer chances for a diverse set of people, then it's not just about having diversity within our own profession. We need diverse clients, we need diverse trustees, we need diverse stakeholders. We need all of these things, and I think we have a long way to go. But I think it is grassroots. And just finally, I know that, you know, we're trying to fight for gender equality, LGBTQ plus, and obviously BAME, even though I hate that term. But I think there's also a cause for fighting for a diversity of personality within our industry. That we do speak a lot about, you know, forthright, tenacity, speaking up, but also there should be a place and space, a safe space for those who perhaps are introverted, who have incredible ideas to actually speak. I don't know how that can be done, but I'm quite conscious of that.
Sorry, just to quickly chip in, and it's probably sort of the opposite of what you've just, the last sentence you said, but I think another way that we can really help is you know, getting out there and doing talks in schools, you know, just at the advocacy side, again, which is in this handbook, and I think that's a really powerful tool, is to get out and, you know, just be out there for the kids leaving school, and so that they've just got that seed when they're going through university, that there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel, as it were.
Can I also chip in?
Sure.
So I agree with a lot of what you've said as well, and I think one thing I did realize in terms of when I was working at public practice, I had to work on a lot of the diversity recruitment strategies, and some of the things were really interesting in terms of the language that we use to invite people into the space and make them feel like they actually have the opportunity to actually get a job. And I think it's really important for us to really recognize that it's not just, it's definitely not an easy fix. And I think I'm still personally trying to reckon with that. I'm still trying to understand all of these different processes. I think recently, I'm not sure if this actually happened, but I think we were talking about the fact that we had on our application form like a free school tick box, basically, just to understand all of those types of things. And I think before I left, one of the things that we were working on was a diversity roundtable. And one of the things that I think I learned personally was that we all have different personality and personal identities, and we all have different responsibilities. And I think it's really important that we make it clear in our applications that, for instance, like I didn't recognize that for returners to work, they actually prefer if you said it in your application. And I personally, with my own bias, is not actually taking care of children. I recognize the fact that actually that is really important. Those are really important things to have, even in terms of mobility, in terms of race, in terms of sex, in terms of, there's so many different personality traits or identities that we all have because we're all different people. And I think it's really important we address that. And I think if you're in a small firm, it's really important to have those honest conversations. If you are in a bigger firm, I think it's important to create diversity board. And I say diversity board, not a diversity officer, because there's so much overwhelming, there's a overwhelming work if you're a diversity officer just for one person. But if you're a board and you start representing a lot of those people that in your company, then you actually start giving them a voice, you start empowering them, and you start actually maybe even providing them more opportunities. So I think if you are in a smaller firm, there's that transparency and just the understanding that you're going to get things wrong. You don't have all the answers, and you do need to make sure to kind of partner with organizations and networks that are actually doing the work to promote diversity as well. You have LGBTQIA+ groups, you have Black-led groups, you have BAME-led groups, you have women-led groups. There are so many organizations out there that we all can partner with and we can all learn from. So I think it's really important we use that, especially in this time.
Okay. Well, I think we are kind of running to the end of our time with questions. I'm going to pass you over to Betty, who's another young trustee. But just to mention, I mean, there's been so many great questions in the chat box, which unfortunately we haven't had time to get to, but we will try and maybe address some of them, or possibly speak to some of the panelists after this and see if we can put something together to kind of get some answers. But for now, I'm going to pass you over to Betty.
Hi everyone, it's been such an amazing evening, and all the speakers, Alicia, Ken and Gurmeet, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and answering all the brilliant questions we've had. And yeah, as David was saying, we've had loads of brilliant questions, and unfortunately we aren't able to answer them all this evening, but we're capturing all of them, and we really hope to engage with them in a longer form at a later date where we can go through all the answers. And we prepared a Google form that we're sharing in the chat now, that if people want to connect with us, they can use that. We'll get your email address, and we're also sharing our email address and our social media handles, so you can follow us there too. And that's kind of going to one of the really good questions we had in the chat from Tati V, who was asking about where we can start building community between the people that are in this room right now, of allies and people that we know we can turn to at this when we have these issues going on. And we're hoping that we can use the Young Trustees platform and this business as usual platform in order to facilitate those conversations and to link up people together who are going through things now, would like to have a network and building up. I think what was something that really came out today was that through everything that everybody was talking about was about power. And we've compiled a list of resources that we want to share with you today, and they kind of speak to two different groups of people, I guess. People who have power and can start to take action and pull up and start to help people who haven't got as much power, and then people who need support. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing some of the resources that we have collected. So like Ken and Gurmeet and Alicia were mentioning, the Supporting Diversity Handbook by the Mayor of London and GLA is an absolutely fantastic resource, and I really recommend that if anyone here hasn't read it, that after this talk you go away and read it from cover to cover, because it's an amazing tool for advocacy and communication and action on the barriers so equality, diversity and inclusion within the built environment. And there are so many recommendations and things that we can apply to all different stages of career, which is really important. And yeah, I think everyone should go away and read that. The second thing that we'd like to spotlight is the Design Can campaign, which was mentioned in the Architecture Foundation's email after the Blackout Tuesday event. And it's a really important resource as well that we can all use in our daily lives to kind of inform ourselves about issues to do with race in architecture and other things, but also as a way to, I guess, celebrate people that are doing amazing work in the space as well. So they've got like a kind of manifesto, like a list of actions that we can take in the industry under the hashtag #YouCan campaign. So things like recognizing our privilege, becoming an ally, which is something that was really drawn upon tonight, and I think we should continue to be doing that. And so if you go to their website, you can find out more about it. And then going on to specific organizations, which I'll just run through quite quickly. These are ones that are providing mentoring and support to people within architecture. So you've got obviously Untitled Trust and Fluid Mentoring Network Program and the Aiming in Property. So these are groups that are helping people in the space. You can see their links there. Further ones are, if you're younger, Open City and their Accelerate program. So if you're in sixth form and you would like some more support with architecture, they're a really great organisation to get in touch with. And then the Paradigm Network, who are a network that exists to increase BAME representation in the built environment. I know Alicia mentioned them. Then going on to things that people who have more power could maybe engage in, there's The Other Box, who are a diversity and inclusion company who help to educate businesses on biases through CPD and like consultancy. So that's a really good resource. And then the Creative Mentor Network, who also provide similar services, but also do provide mentoring for people. And then finally, we just want to kind of celebrate, I guess, all the groups that we kind of know at the moment who are doing amazing work in the space. So of course, Alicia's groups that she mentioned, like Black Females in Architecture and Migrants Bureau, but as well, lots of other spin-offs who are doing things, not just in architecture, but in other media too. So New Architecture Writers, who helped to spawn After Party, the Sound Advice platform, which is coming up with its third publication very soon. And you know, great architecture design collectives like Resolve Collective and Migrants Bureau and Power Out of Restriction, who are doing incredible work in the built environment right now. So this is like it wasn't like a comprehensive kind of list of resources, but these are groups we decided to spotlight this evening, and we're compiling a list that we can send out to people who are interested of all these great resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. Thanks to all our speakers. Thanks to everyone listening today. We'll continue the conversation offline and online. So thanks for attending today, guys.